Hello everyone, and I hope that you're doing well. Today we are doing another BGCSE past paper review. This is a combined science paper and it's a paper 2 from the year 2022. Please remember, before you start the examination, always write the school number, your candidate number, your surname, and also your initials. Please remember to read through the instructions carefully before the examination begins. And if you should have any questions or queries, please clarify those with the examiner. They will also provide you with a periodic table to assist you with the chemistry questions. All right, so let us jump into question number 1. And question number 1 reads that the diagram represents one of the 4 kind of permanent teeth found in the human mouth. It said what type of tooth is shown in the diagram and what is its function. And this is a premolar. And of course, it's very easy to confuse the premolar and the molar because they're similar, but the molar will be larger surface area. All right, so the function of the premolar and also molar is for chewing and grinding of food. Generally, we say the crushing of food. For part 2 is to name one other type of tooth and give its function. And so I give you all 3. You have a canine is for tearing of food, incisor is a cutting of food, and if you write molar, then it is the crushing of food. For part B is to explain how a diet rich in refined sugar may result in tooth decay. And the first thing that will happen here, if you do not clean the teeth properly, what will happen here is that the sugar will remain on the teeth, and then bacteria will feed on the sugar and produce acids, and then the acids now will start to break down the enamel, resulting in cavity. All right, and so of course you're going to feel some pain because the nerve will be exposed, and that will be a serious kind of pain. So of course you want to make sure you have proper oral hygiene. All right, for part C, is after food leaves the mouth, it travels down to the esophagus as a bolus. And a bolus is a ball of food, all right, mixed with saliva and enzyme. Now, it says state the name of this process, and it's called peristalsis. And it said describe how food is moved along the esophagus. And so this is actually defining or explaining the process of peristalsis. And so what happened here, the esophagus contracts and relaxes, creating what they call a wave-like motion, and the wave-like motion now will create a downward force on the bolus, pushing it towards the stomach. All right, and you can check out some diagrams for peristalsis. You actually see where the esophagus going in and out. All right, for question number 2, it said in the lab, a student uses blue and red litmus paper to test and classify the chemicals contained in 3 bottles. And you have bottle A, B, and C with missing labels. It said the results obtained by the student are shown in the table below. And so the first column gives you the chemicals, and then you have the observations on the right for blue and red litmus paper. All right, so they give you the information right here, and it says use the observation given in the table to classify substance A, B, and C as either acid, base, or a neutral substance. And so for A, if you look at A, in both paper test, A remains the same. So litmus paper remains the same in this case. So therefore nothing changes. And so it is a neutral substance. For B, B turns the blue litmus paper red, and that indicate that is an acid, and it remains red for the red litmus paper. All right, so B is an acid. Now, the blue litmus paper remains blue, but however, the red one turns blue, and that indicates that it is a base. All right, for part B, it's another student spills some acid on the lab desk and wanted to neutralize the acid before wiping the desk. So which of the chemical tested could you recommend the student to use to neutralize the acid on the desk? And so if it's an acid, what neutralizes acid is a base. So you look at C will be the substance. So the base will be used to do that. For part C, it's a common acid and base used in the lab is shown below. So you have hydrochloric acid, which is a common acid, HCl, and we have a common base here, which is sodium hydroxide, which is NaOH. And so for part 1 of C, it said acids and bases changes the color of pH indicator. It's a state one other property that is different between acids and bases. And so besides changing the color, acids they are sour and bases are bitter, but of course you do not taste anything in the lab. Also, what is different between acid and base is that acids will have low pH, and to be specific, the pH will be lower than 7. And bases now will have pH above 7. So bases will have higher pH compared to acids. All right, so part 2 of this question, it said name 2 products formed when the acid and base in C react together. And so the 2 products would be salt and water. And so the salt, the specific salt would be sodium chloride. And how we know is sodium chloride? Let me just go back and indicate that, because chlorine, which is hydrochloric acid, so the Cl from the acid and the Na from the base will go together to form sodium chloride. Part D is a magnesium reacts vigorously with dilute hydrochloric acid. The word equation for this reaction is to write the word equation for this reaction. And so the word equation will be magnesium plus hydrochloric acid will give you magnesium chloride and hydrogen gas. And again, you also could practice do the chemical balanced chemical equation as well, because sometimes they ask you to do that. For part 2 is to describe what you can see occurring in the reaction vessel as this reaction proceeds. And so one observation you may see will be bubbles, which is called effervescence. And this is the process of forming bubbles without applying heat. All right. And the reason for this is because the gas is given off within the liquid. And the second observation, you can see magnesium dissolving. Another one you actually will see, but it's what you can see. The other one you will notice, but is not necessarily seeing it. You have to actually touch it. And so that one will be the vessel will become warmer. All right, and that is just by using a thermometer or just simple touching the vessel. You realize it will be warmer because it will be an exothermic reaction. Question number 3. So the pie chart shows the compositions of gases in dry air. And so I can label them real quick. We have nitrogen, which is the largest, then oxygen, then we have carbon dioxide. All right, and it said for part A, so which letter represents oxygen, and that will be Y as indicated based on my labeling. And then it asks now, part B says state the name of a natural process that produces oxygen, and that process is photosynthesis. And that is done by plants and plant-like organisms. And for part C, it's a name another element found in dry air, and that will be nitrogen. All right, and it said element, it never said, and the reason why I'm going to point this out, because nitrogen is an element, and so carbon dioxide is a compound, right? So there's that difference there, so have to be careful with the words that they use. Now, part D is oxygen is used in many processes. It's a completely word equation for the reaction that takes place between fossil fuels and excess oxygen. And yeah, fossil fuels plus oxygen will give you carbon dioxide and water. And it said name the type of reaction in D1 taking place between fossil fuels and oxygen, and that is called combustion. All right, and we do the same thing as burning. All right, so combustion is taking place, and you cannot have combustion without oxygen. Part 3 is to state one reason why this reaction is important, and is the purpose for it is really to produce energy. All right, so besides getting carbon dioxide and water, you get energy. For E, it said when fossil fuels are burned in power stations, air pollutants are produced. It's a name an air pollutant that contributes to the formation of acid rain. And so you may have sulfur dioxide, or you may have nitrogen oxides. And so there are different oxides of nitrogen, all right, just to mention that. And it's a name 2 negative effects of acid rain on living organisms. And so we have a number of different things here. As a matter of fact, let me just change this one into red, because that's not on living thing, that's on building. And so you may have damage to plants. This one is also not on buildings. Let me put that in red as well. So not on living things. So looking for the living things one is that you can have damage to plants. You may have deplete nutrients in soil. That's another one which is not on living things. So generally, you may have damage to the organism or living things. You may have also the destruction of their skin, all right, or the exoskeleton. For example, crabs or even conch, because the shell is made up of calcium carbonate, and so you may have damage to structures as well. So let's put that one in, damage to structures. All right, so any of those, but I just give you all the general negative effects of acid rain. The damage to structures may be another one, or body structures. Let's put body structures there. And you can be very specific to say, example, the shell of conch, all right, the skin of animals, because acids will definitely damage those parts. And if the ocean is acidified, then yes, it will cause damage to the body of the structure. So these are the two main things: damage to plant leaves and so on. All right, and so you can make a note of the others that are in red, which would be the general negative effects. All right, so there we go with that question. Question number 4. Question number 4, it reads now that the symbol equation shown in, shows the metal potassium reacting with a non-metal sulfur to form potassium sulfide. So here now, potassium is a metal, as they stated right here, and the sulfur is a non-metal. And so the balanced chemical equation will be 2K, which is 2 potassium plus 1 molecule of sulfur, will give you K2S. It's a give one property of sulfur that indicates it is a non-metal. And so non-metals tend to be dull, they are non-conductors, they are not malleable, and they are not ductile. All right? And remember what malleability means. That means they can bend beat into shapes, and ductile, which means they could be drawn into wires or form wires. Now for part 2, it said explain why chemical bonds are formed. And chemical bonds are formed because one of the atoms is able to pull electrons to itself, resulting in attraction of the atoms, and this results in a stable atom. All right, so chemical bonds are formed simply by just either sharing or transferring of electrons. You can even make that as a very short version of it: transfer or sharing of electrons, and that's how you form chemical bonds. All right, and of course the ability is because the reason for that is because one has the ability to pull electron to itself. Part 3 is a use information in the symbol equation to describe what happens to the outer electrons when potassium reacts with sulfur. And so potassium is the metal, so potassium will transfer a single electron to the sulfur. And so you have 2 potassium. So if you go back to the red equation, let's go back 1 second to show you. You will have 2 potassium here, so 2K. All right, and since you have 2K now, each will transfer a single electron to the sulfur. All right, and so sulfur will now gain 2 electrons. In total, increases outer shell electrons to 8. All right, and so what we'll have here is that they will become stable outer shells. All right, and so they actually ask that. So what happened to the outer electrons when potassium reacts with sulfur? So for sulfur will increase, and then for potassium it will decrease. As a matter of fact, we'll lose that outer electron, that single outer electron, while sulfur will gain two electrons and become 8. Part B is a methane is covalently bonded compound. Is a covalently bonded compound. It's a write the chemical formula for methane, which is CH4. That is the simplest organic compound that you may have. And it's a draw a dot and cross diagram to show the bonding in methane. So you can just pause here and go through it. You will actually see everything that represents carbon is in red, and those that represent hydrogen will be in blue. And remember that hydrogen has only 1 valence electron, carbon has 4. Part 3 is at room temperature and pressure, methane is a gas. It's a describe what would happen to the gas particles if the temperature was lowered, so they condense. And so if the temperature is lowered, then what will happen here is that they will move slower. And the reason why they move slow, because they lose what they call kinetic energy. And kinetic energy is energy that deals with motion. And so because of this loss in kinetic energy, then the particles will move slower and come closer together. So these will be move slower and they will come closer together. Next question is question number 5. This one now states that this simple circuit can be used to light a bulb. And it said the current from a battery is direct current. The current from the main supply is alternating current. It's a defined current electricity. And current electricity is simply the flow of electrons or electrical charges through a circuit. And it said explain the difference between direct and alternating current. And for direct current, the charges flow in one direction while alternating current, the charges flow in different directions. And for part 3, it's a give one advantage of using alternating current over direct current. And for alternating current, which is the general power coming from a general power plant like BPL, for example, it is easier to generate, it costs less, and it transmit over easy to transmit over a long distance without losing charges. All right, so those are the 3 main advantages. But part B is that in a room, in a house, there are 4 electrical lamps in parallel with each other, controlled by a single switch. It's that with all the lamps working, one of the lamp filaments suddenly breaks. What, if anything, happens to the remaining lamps? Give a reason for your answer. And so there'll be no effect to the other lamps, and simply because each lamp has its own path for current to flow. Hence, if one is supposed to say if one breaks, so if one breaks, it does not affect the current flowing to the other lamps, all right, because they have different paths for current to flow. That's the beauty of parallel circuit. If it was a series circuit now, then if one component is damaged, it affects all the others. For part C, it's a voltmeter is used to measure the potential difference across resistors. Defined potential difference. And potential difference is the difference in electrical potential between 2 points in a circuit. And potential difference is a measure of the energy required to carry the charges between 2 points in a circuit. And a point to note, it is measured in volts. As a matter of fact, this is a question here. Is to give the unit used to measure potential difference, and it is voltage. All right, so the unit is actually V, which is volts. I must put that in bracket, so it will be volts. All right, so part 3 of this question here is to describe the function of a resistor, and a resistor really resists or opposes or even limits the flow of current. All right, so it really limits or opposes the flow of current. That's a resistor. And of course, resistance is measured in ohms. You need to also know that as well, right? Now, question number 6. This diagram shows an ecosystem in the Bahamas. And this ecosystem, as you notice it, is the mangroves. So define the term ecosystem. And an ecosystem is really an area where different living organisms, which is the biotic aspect of the environment, live and interact with each other, and the non-living, which is the abiotic part of the environment. All right, so once you have the biotic and abiotic interacting, then that is an ecosystem. Matter of fact, it can be also described as a group of community interacting with each other and also the non-living environment. All right, and you need to know what are abiotic and biotic. Some examples of biotic will be animals, plants, and so on. And abiotic will be like the rocks, water, the temperature, and all of those stuff. All right, part 2 is what is the principal source of energy for any biological system, and that is the sun. The sun is the principal source of every biological system. That's where the first energy comes from. All right, so part B1 is name the plant shown in the diagram. And if you go back up to the plant, you'll realize that it is a red mangrove. Notice the nice prop roots. All right, and it's actually in water. All right, so it is the red mangrove, and the scientific name for red mangrove is the Rhizophora mangle. And it said identify one feature seen in this plant that allows it to adapt to the environment, and this is prop roots, and the function it is for these prop roots is really for stability. All right, so the adaptation is prop roots, and it is for stability. What you will also see on the red mangrove, let me just go back 1 second. What you also see on the red mangrove, it is not shown here. You'll see propagule, and propagule is also an adaptation to allow the seeds to survive much easier when they fall into the water. They actually become anchored. All right, now for part 3 is to give one benefit of this plant to the Bahamas, and it serves many functions, many purposes, or many benefits. And so one is to stabilize the shoreline. Red mangroves, they act as windbreakers as well from strong winds from hurricanes and storms. Filter runoff water. So when water is coming from land into the ocean, it filter it and remove like trashes and so on. So the solid waste will be trapped into the mangrove roots. It doesn't mean that we need to dump things in the mangrove, no, because the mangrove will filter them. But in case things are coming from land into the ocean, they be trapped into the roots of these mangroves. It also serves as a nursery ground, which is a safe haven for most organisms. So you'll find that you'll see small juvenile fishes there. Eggs will be laid there and so on. And then we also have habitat for important species as well, such as bonefish. You may find bonefish in the mangrove. You may find small crayfish. All right, you may find other organisms such as birds, snakes, the boa constrictor. So there are a lot of organisms that depend on the mangrove for survival. All right, next part. They said the hermit crab shown in the diagram can also be found in another ecosystem. And it said ecosystem in the Bahamas. And it said name that ecosystem. And the hermit crab can be found on the rocky shores, and they can also found on the sandy shore as well. All right. And then for part D, it said the ecosystem shown in the diagram is very biodiverse, and it's explained term biodiverse. And to be biodiverse, it really means that an ecosystem with a wide variety of thriving living organisms. So in other words, there are a lot of different organisms there just living and thriving. All right, for part 2, it's a state one way in which human activities can prevent ecosystem from being diverse. And so for us, we overharvest or overexploit ecosystems or organisms. All right, so what you do is when you overharvest is prevent them from reproducing and increasing their population or maintaining the population. Pollution is a large one as well. You pollute the environment, and so by polluting them, you may also destroy them in different ways. You may affect their breeding system. You may contaminate their water sources. You may do so many bad things with pollution, and so we have to be mindful. Habitat destruction is a big one, and habitat destruction could be simple of coastal constructions or coastal development, and so you destroy the habitat. Even by cutting down trees, you destroy habitat. All right, dumping, you destroy the habitat. Releasing invasive species. So if we have like pet fish, for example, that come from different countries, you release them in the water. Sometimes they also take over and become invasive. Certain plants also can also be invasive if you carry them from different countries, plant them, and then they take over and destroy other plants. Let's jump to the next question, question number 7. And this one's a defined temperature in terms of kinetic theory. And once you talk about kinetic theory, this is what I want to bear in mind. Once you see the word kinetic, you talk about the movement of particles, right? And so temperature is a measure for hot or cold a substance is. That's what temperature is. And so it's an indicator of the average kinetic energy of the particles within a substance. That is, the higher the kinetic energy, the higher the temperature. So in other words, what this is actually saying, when particles become hotter, they will move faster because they have more energy. All right, so higher kinetic energy means higher temperature, or higher temperature means higher kinetic energy. All right, so that means if you see higher temperatures on the thermometer, you know that these particles are moving much faster. However, part B, the diagram shows a thermometer reading in degrees Celsius. And the reading right here, just put it right here, is 25 degrees Celsius right here, halfway between 20 and 30. All right, and then here it said convert this value to Kelvin, including the unit in your answer. And so this is 25 plus 273, because from degrees Celsius that's at 273, do you give it 298 Kelvin? All right, and so part 2 is to state the freezing and boiling point of water on the degrees on the Celsius scale. And the freezing point for water is 0 degrees Celsius, and the boiling point is 100 degrees Celsius. And that's for pure water. All right. Let's get to the next part of this question. Part C is a diagram shows a pot being heated on a stove top. And we have 3 labelings right here. We have A, B, and C. And it said there are 3 types of heat transfer. A, B, and C are shown. And then it said name the 3 types of heat transfer. And of course, because this is a solid, A is a solid is the handle, that will be conduction. And B, which is the fluid or liquid, then this will be convection. And coming from the coil on the stove top, and it go into the atmosphere without any metal or fluid, then that will be radiation. So notice is wave-like, so that is radiated heat. Part 2 is energy is passed from the heated pot throughout the liquid. It's in terms of particles behavior, which is also referring to kinetic theory as well, explain how this type of heat transfer occurs. And so this is what will happen here. And again, once you see particle behavior and so on, is reference to the kinetic theory. All right, so when the particles at the bottom get heated and become hot, they move to the top. And the reason why they move to the top because they gain more kinetic energy, right? So you can also add that piece in. So they move to the top because of gain of kinetic energy. While hotter particles are rising, so while hotter particles are rising, the cooler particles drop to the bottom, and this creates a continuous movement of particles, and that we call boiling. So as the hot one going up, the cold one falling, and they keep on rotating like that, because once they go to the top, they lose energy and become cooler and start to fall to the bottom again. And the quicker, the more heat you apply to this, the faster this happens, because the particles start to gain energy much faster, and so you have rapid boiling. All right, so next question, last question, a matter of fact. The diagram shows a section of the human eye. All right, again, I've labeled these structures, so you can just pause and go through it, and actually you can also practice labeling the other parts that I didn't label. And it said name the structure labeled A, B, C, and D. And A is the lens, B is the cornea, C is the iris, and D is the retina. So let's go back to the diagram one more time so you can just pause it. Matter of fact, you could go back by yourself. And so he said here, now part 2, state the functions of B and E. And B is for protection and also refraction and focusing of light that is entering the eye. So the cornea is doing that, protects the eye. That's one purpose of the cornea. And the cornea, because it's curved, so it is curved, and so since it's curved, it causes light to refract. And once light is refracting, light will end up focus into the eye itself. And for structure E, let me just go back to the diagram so you see exactly what that is. Structure E, I think that's a fovea or the yellow spot, and that's where you have the greatest vision. All right, and so that is for sharp vision. For part C, part B, a matter of fact, right? For part B, it's a name the nerve that connects the eye to the brain, and that's the optic nerve. It's to explain why it is necessary to control the amount of light entering the eye. And so there's a number of reasons. One is to prevent internal damage of the eye, because if too much light enters the eye, it could cause damage. Matter of fact, if too much light is there also, you may not see well. And for 2 is to ensure sufficient light or proper focus for sight. All right. And so the last part of this question is to name 2 kinds of cells found in D. And D is the retina, so you find rods and cones. I need to know that rods is for vision in dim light or black and white, and then cones are for bright light and also for colored vision. All right, and so we're at the end of this review, and I thank you for watching, and I also wish you luck on the examinations. And please don't forget to subscribe, like as well, and also share with your friends. All right, so take care, and I will talk to you soon.